reliance on fossil fuels is undesirable, and my three supporting claims are fossil fuels are finite and unsustainable, obtaining fossil fuels is expensive, dangerous, and relies on the cooperation of foreign countries, and continued use of fossil fuels at the current rate will lead to harmful effects. So fossil fuels are finite and unsustainable. As the demand for fossil fuels increases, the supply of it will diminish and the price will shoot up. The population is growing at a higher rate, increasing the consumption of energy and lowering the supply of fossil fuels, which will sooner or later run out. Once the deposits are used, the fossil fuels cannot be replenished, including the existing oil reserves and anticipated reserves resulting from new technologies and discoveries. The EIA, which is the U.S. Energy Information Administration, estimates that less than half the world's total conventional oil reserves will be exhausted by 2030. On the other hand, renewable energy sources will not run out. A quote from ecology.com states that sun, wind, and water are perfect energy sources. Not only do the use of renewable energy sources help reduce global carbon dioxide emissions, but they also add some much-needed flexibility to the energy resource mix by decreasing our dependence on limited reserves of fossil fuels. There's more than enough renewable energy sources to supply all of the world's needs forever. And my second supporting claim is obtaining fossil fuels is expensive, dangerous, and relies on the cooperation of foreign countries. America highly relies on energy to power our homes, our businesses, our schools, and so on. And according to the High Cost of Fossil Fuels report by Environment America, the cost of continuing our current energy path is steep. American consumers and businesses already spend about $700 billion to $1 trillion a year on natural gas, oil, and coal. And it's going to increase between the years 2010 and 2030 to about $23 trillion. With the constant increase and demand for energy, obtaining fossil fuels has become dangerous. Our resources are depleting, therefore we are digging deeper into the Earth's surface and looking for new ways to obtain fossil fuels. We are building oil rigs offshore and rely on obtaining these sources from other countries. As a result, the United States constantly spends more money trying to obtain these resources. One of the problems with trying to obtain them is that it's dangerous. So recently there was an oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, and it was a small leak in the pipe, but it contaminated the water, and there was a small explosion causing the death of a few people. The water is contaminated, and nearby ecosystems are damaged, which took millions of years to form. And the third point is continued use of fossil fuels at the current rate will lead to harmful effects such as droughts, flooding, hurricanes, heat waves, and rising sea levels. Climate change causes severe weather patterns to become even more severe. There will be an increase in Category 4 and 5 hurricanes, which are the strongest, most intense hurricanes. They have a high percentage of destroying homes, causing power outages, and making areas inhabitable for weeks to months. Heavy rainfall and intense storms will lead to flooding in many areas. There will be longer periods of dry spells or droughts in between rain. This means drought is projected to increase over Africa, Europe, and North America, especially the southwest region of the United States. These droughts could happen with very little warning, and also an increase of heat waves is also expected, which can be harmful to our health. Thermal expansion and melting of ice is already happening and is causing global sea levels to rise, and will continue to happen if we do not severely restrict our use of fossil fuels. Rising sea levels have very harmful consequences. Even a small increase can have a devastating effect on coastal habitats. As seawater reaches farther inland, it can cause destructive erosion, flooding of wetlands, and contamination of agricultural soils, and loss of habitat for fish, birds, and plants. The bottom line is that climate change has many dangerous effects to our environment and consequently our health. This is being caused by the use of fossil fuels and can't be stopped if we severely restrict them.
Okay, the proposition is clearly identified. There's a preview of the supporting structure. I do think you rushed that a little bit. Controversy on the issue, I think there's some aspects of what you're talking about that are controversial, some that are not particularly controversial. I don't think there's much dispute that fossil fuels are in essence finite and that we're going to run out of them someday. So I doubt that there's going to be a challenge on that particular point. The question is, can they be replaced in the amount of time that we have remaining? I mean, in essence, you say we're going to have only half of what we had originally left by 2030, which doesn't tell us how long it's going to take us to get rid of the other half, and at that point maybe some of these alternatives are going to be available. I think the second point, where you're talking about it being dangerous, you have a lot of generic arguments about the dangers here that need to be either focused a little bit more or developed with a little bit more content. The arguments about searching for it come down to a vague reference to the BP leak, and there's no data on that, which shouldn't have been hard to find. You kind of are opaque about citing that particular example, and that seems a little bit strange. In the context of the search for additional fossil fuels, that's the only thing that you have that really seems directly related to that particular point on danger. Outside of that, the dangers are all the environmental effects that come from the use of fossil fuels. And interestingly enough, although I'm sure that you did research on this, this is the section where there is no source citation presented for any of the data that you've got. You mentioned an increase in category 4 to 5 hurricanes. I didn't hear a source citation for that. I heard an argument about flooding. I didn't hear a source citation on that. There's stuff about the seawater leaching into the lowlands. I didn't hear a source citation on that. And most importantly, you say that it all could be stopped if we severely reduce the use of fossil fuels. I didn't hear anything about that, so that's a little bit problematic. The notion that we've got access to all of these other resources does require that we develop technologies to be able to make use of those resources, and there's not any discussion of that issue. So that we are dependent on the resources, that's not in dispute. That there are some negative consequences of using them, I think that that's widely acknowledged. But the notion that we have an alternative, I think that's where the biggest controversy is, and there's the least amount of development on that. It's nicely organized. It's easy for us to listen to. You do need to cite the sources a little bit more consistently. All right, thank you.